I'm Kirby Allison. We're really excited to be here outside of London in Eastbourne on the southern coast of the United Kingdom here at the LastMaker House with Dominic Casey, renowned LastMaker and bona fide bespoke shoemaker extraordinaire, to learn more about the bespoke process. First, he's going to be taking my measurements. Trained properly as a LastMaker, he is going to take my measurements, and then today we're going to see him begin to carve my last out of a solid block of wood. So it's going to be really exciting. I'm thrilled to be here, Dominic. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. It's exciting to be down here, and
so it's nice to get you out of London.
It is. It's nice to be in the proper, in the seaside.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about kind of what we're going to do here.
So, the first thing that any bespoke shoemaker has to do when he starts off making a pair of shoes is actually, obviously, measure the client's feet. So, the first thing that anyone really ought to be doing is actually taking a look at the shoes that you've come in wearing, really. And we need to take them off you, and the first thing that I always like to do is look through them and begin to understand how you're carrying your weight, what's happening with the inside of the shoe that you're wearing at the moment, because your weight will beginning to mould an impression into the leather insole there. So the shoes that you're actually wearing is going to be telling me a lot about the shoes that we're going to be going and how I'm actually going to be making the last for you.
Okay.
So the first thing is to get these off you.
All right.
And see where we need to go from here. So obviously left and right. Just checking, was that the Beluti knot that we're undoing at the moment?
Yes, it is. It's a good eye.
Yeah. So that's.
Had you known about the Beluti knot before?
Well, funnily you should mention it, I learnt about it on YouTube watching one of your videos.
Oh, that's incredible.
So I'm now pleased to say that I can recognise a Beluti knot.
Your shoes aren't coming untied anymore.
My shoes are not coming untied, exactly.
Yep. So this is a pair of bespoke Cleverleys.
Yes.
And I don't remember which, I think maybe my third shoe.
Right.
And generally they fit quite well.
So the first thing that I always like to look at is actually, if you actually look down through the shoe, I can actually begin to see the indentations and the moulding and the marks where your foot is actually leaving some impression on the leather insole there.
Absolutely.
So the colours and the depth of the colour is actually telling me where you're carrying your weight.
Kind of like an ink print.
It's exactly like an ink print. It is, in effect, the ink print of your foot. So it's showing me where all of the pressure points are coming. So I know that I can begin to actually lift your foot up, and I can actually begin to feel where the bones, there's a very strong mark where this bone is dropping down. There's a strong mark where that kind of toe bone is actually hitting on your foot as well, and on the outside of this small toe. So even though we actually haven't started measuring your foot yet, it's beginning to tell me information that I need to actually understand about making a last.
And that's quite different from customer to customer.
Yes, exactly. So some customers, you'll see a really strongly defined impression in the base of their current shoe, and you actually put your hand in it, and what I'm beginning to do is, if you run your hand down there, you can actually feel the way that your foot has actually moulded into the leather and the cork internally on the shoe, and that's telling me about the shape of the bottom of your foot. Mm-hmm. So already, we haven't actually done anything yet, but I'm actually beginning to understand where this joint, this bone here is beginning to land, where that one's beginning to land, and how all of this is actually beginning to work, even though we actually haven't. And then usually the last thing I'll do is I'll just turn it over and just begin to check out to see if what the wear pattern is looking like on the base of the shoe. So I'd like to see where the big toe is actually landing on your foot, where the big joints and the little joints are landing. And then I'd usually just take a look at it just to see what the balance is looking and how you're kind of wearing it, whether you're kind of kicking out the outside of the toe on that side more than the inside of the toe there, which probably tells me the foot's rolling slightly in that direction as it comes down.
So any type of pronation?
Any pronation. So it's, this is kind of full of information that any kind of LastMaker would really need to know before they get going.
And really. That type of information would actually inform the way you're making the last.
This is not so much the shape of your foot, but it's actually telling me how your foot's working already. So that's the one thing that we really need to get to grips with. So we're going to measure your feet now. Essentially, really traditional, old school, the way that feet have been measured and looked at for kind of hundreds of years, really. But as soon as I actually start measuring your feet, what I'm actually thinking about is how I'm going to be carving a block for you. So not only am I going to be measuring your feet, I'm going to start thinking about the shapes that and the curvatures that your feet are beginning to throw out. So I'm going to really start thinking about the curvature on the back of your heel here. I'm going to start thinking about the thinness of the ankle coming through on the inside and the outside. I'm going to start looking at your instep here. I'm going to start feeling for the bones, because what I'm going to try and do is tie up the architecture and the bone structure of your foot with the measurements. So what I need to do is understand how this is built, and then I can actually begin to copy it in terms of a last. So there's obvious things that I need to know, like, are there any turned up toes? What's that little toe doing there? You know, I'm feeling that there's a little bit of hard skin on the bottom of there. Sorry about that. So I'm just making a note of the fact that there's some weight coming down on the outside of that toe. I'm looking for any kind of hammer toes, anything that's turning up.
What about with shapes also? Because certain feet can, are appropriate for certain, silhouettes of shoes.
Yeah.
Is that something you're thinking about here also in terms
exactly.
of kind of
I mean,
where,
I can
where
just
you would
look
take
at this. I can look at this shape straight away, and instantly, I can see that there's a very different shape without actually even measuring or looking at. I can just look at the shape of these toes, and you can see that there's a very different shape and profile between your right over here and your left over there. Now my job, I can instantly see without even measuring anything that the left is a very different shape from the right. So my job as a last maker is to actually make you a pair of shoes and a pair of lasts. So one of the things that we all have to do as last makers and shoemakers is interpret what we've actually got on the foot, translate it into a pair of shoes that looks like a pair of shoes, even though you can see the shapes are completely different at the front here. There's great news for you, Kirby. You have, and not many people would have told you this, you've got a lovely pair of feet.
Okay, thank you.
So you've got
So there's hope for me.
So there's hope for you. So just with the shape of this foot, it allows you to make many different types of toe shapes. So just the general shaping of it, there's nothing too dramatic going on, which is going to scare anybody really.
Okay, great.
So let's start getting some measurements on there. The first thing that we really need to make sure is whenever you've got somebody sitting down, whenever I want to actually start making a last for you and start making shoes for people, is that we need to check your socks.
Okay.
So remarkably, it makes a lot of difference, the weight and the thickness of the sock that you're wearing. Sometimes we have people turn up in sports socks and stuff like that, and they want a pair of dress shoes made. And they've come in with the trainers from their gym. So, as long as this is the kind of standard weight sock that you're going to be wearing, then we're kind of in good shape. And the other thing about wearing socks is sometimes when you get people with these self-measurement forms, they tend to make, if you draw a foot and it's not got a sock on it, it tends to splay out. So the toes tend to splay out. And one thing that a sock actually begins to do is actually hold your foot in some shape as well.
Okay.
So it's important for us because that's actually beginning to give us and define us some shaping there. So the first thing that we need to do is actually make sure your leg's sitting straight. We can't afford it to be rolling out because that's going to change the profile, and we can't really afford it to be knocking in. So we have to get the leg, making sure that you're sitting comfortably, and the foot sitting here. Now, this is traditionally the way that we've always taken shoe drawings, is with clients sitting down. I think there's probably as many different ways of actually taking shoe drawings and foot drawings as there are shoemakers. Everybody seems to have some different system. And I think the one thing that we say to the students when they're on the courses here and they're drawing around the foot is you have to be systematic and methodical. So as long as you always approach everything in the same standardised way, then you're going to be in good shape with making a reasonable shape last.
So every last maker may be different.
Every last maker has a different
But they need
way.
to be consistent.
But they need to be consistent, they need to be methodical. So the first drawing is quite simply an outline plan of the foot. The second thing that I'm really interested in is the actual shape of your arch and where the actual arch runs through here. So I need to actually understand what kind of angle that's lying at there, really. So the pencil goes in 45 degrees and we draw an arch line, and that comes down to your large joint bone here. It's a big metatarsal bone, and that's really going to give me some really strong indication of how I'm going to actually cut the last. And when we actually start looking at the last, we'll be drawing that line back into the last, so that one will go back in here. And the final thing that I probably really want to understand from here is just how deep we want to make the last. I'd like to understand somehow where your foot is actually beginning to land on the drawing. So I'm just going to make a final mark right underneath your foot there in the middle, and that's just going to give me a sense of where this outside actually hits the ground. So again, I actually haven't got an ink impression of your foot, but I've got a very strong impression of your foot running through from the base of your sole. And if you actually look through there, you can actually see the dark mark running on the outside, where I can see all of your weight coming down on the outside of your foot.
Absolutely.
So I've already got quite a good impression of what's actually happening on the base of your foot there already. Some people take length measurements as well. Some people calculate it with the tape measure afterwards, but I always like to have some just sense of how long the foot's going to be. So it's just a question of the size stick goes in there. And I'm just going to make a mark there. Mark it off there. 6 3/4, and just record the overall length of the foot. Okay, so simple drawings really, a kind of simple overall plan of the outside of the foot. So it's just showing me the outside plan lines, the inside of the arch, and the depth of the arch as well.
So do you do anything full load bearing where I'm like standing up, or?
No, but what I will do is we're going to measure your feet, and then what we'll do is we'll make some adjustments to the measurements when I actually start to make the last.
Okay.
So many people would actually then get you to stand on your weight and then measure your feet with the weight on it and look at the differences. And some people would be comfortable working that way. But usually what we'll do is what I would do is just make some adjustments to the last, and then we'll see where we go at the fitting, whether we need to actually move from there. And again, just as I'm drawing around it, I'm beginning to just have a think about what the actual physical structure, the bone structure of your foot actually is. You know, I need to really, making a last, I need to actually understand the curvature and the shape of this heel here. And I'm just going to actually measure the back of this heel, just so I get some idea about how much curvature here and how much I need to bring the last in to give you a clip round the back of the heel. So usually I'm just floating my hands around here, looking for the instep bone. I'm looking for whether any of the joints are prominent, how the toes are actually feeling, what's happening with that big nail at the front, so we don't want that kicking up into the top of the shoe. So, and again, once again, it's just a very simple outline, plain drawing of the foot, pencil straight up, all the way around, probably the way shoemakers have taken drawings of feet for hundreds of years, really, no different whatsoever, all the way around the foot. That gives me the general outline plan. When we actually go and look at starting to make a last for you, that's going to be key for us. And
do you write any of those observations down, or is it something you do afterwards?
I will be doing that afterwards. When I actually come to start to make some notes and put some measurements on here, that's when I'll actually start to think, well, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to tie up the measurements to the actual structure of your foot. So I'm going to be looking at the bones, and we're actually going to be putting the tape measure around in very certain specific areas, so that when I actually come to look at the measurements, I know that actually all of them are going to be relating to physical parts of your foot. So we may as well just go over those. So what I'm going to be interested in is the widest part of your foot here, the two bones here. I'm going to be particularly interested in the gap between your small toe, the metatarsal here, and the actual beginning or front of the small toe. I'm going to be particularly interested in your cuneiform bone, which is just sitting off here. Bearing in mind that the cuneiform, it actually runs off at an angle towards the big toe joint. It doesn't actually come down straight. If you look at a lot of modern lasts, it actually comes straight down the middle of the foot, the cone. But actually on a bespoke last, and one of the things that gives the bespoke last a really interesting shape, is that this angle runs off in this direction down towards this bone here. So I need to know where that cuneiform bone is, because that's going to give me the middle of the arch line. I really need to know where this point is, where your leg and your foot meets, the actual break point between the two. So that's going to give me the top of the shoe just underneath there. So when I take this measurement, I'm actually going to be thinking about, actually this is the point here where the laces are going to be meeting, just here. And I'm going to be really interested in the length of this heel line running across here as well, so that I can actually understand how to triangulate the circumference measurements with some of the length measurements. So actually I'm going to be getting all of the measurements from the actual structure of your foot, and that's going to be tying up again onto the actual drawing here. And with those, hopefully, we'll be able to get a decent last made for you. So the one thing that I need to understand here is the shape of your arch, because I actually want to be able to cut the shoes and cut the last in so that it sits in nicely through the arch here. So I just need pencil at 45 degrees, classically, and I just need the shape of that curve there, just so that I know how that arch runs through here. And then the pencil needs to go right under. I just want to get some idea of exactly where your foot actually hits the floor. And again, before on this one, you can really see in this one there's a strong patina, there's a strong change in colour between the light part of the insole where there's no weight bearing and the dark part of the insole where it's all the weight is borne on the outside. So that shoe is telling me where you're actually carrying the weight of your foot. So the last thing I want to do is, and when I'm down here, I'm going to mark two things. I'm just going to mark the widest part of your foot here, the biggest ball joints there. And the one measurement that I probably need to do and just take a look at to give me some idea is one of the curves that I need to understand is how this back curve works. So I'm just going to simply, I'm thinking in terms of a back height of a shoe. So if I'm going to make a shoe and cut a shoe, where the back of this is going to come to. And I need to understand, if I stand a pencil up straight there, you can see that it creates a bit of a gap there. And I just want to get a measurement there so that I can understand how much this cuts in. And it's usually 5, 6, 7 mils, not a huge amount, 6 millimeters. So that's just going to, when we actually come to look at the last, that's going to give me some idea about how I need to actually curve this back to get a nice fit round the back of the heel. And in terms of width, I'll just have a feel around here, and you've got very slim heels at the back of your foot here. So I might just make a note of that on the drawing, so it'll give me a good idea. I want to look to see if you've got any heel spurs. There's a touch of a heel spur just on the outside here, but nothing too dramatic. Very slim heel. So I know that when I actually come to make the last, I've got to be really clipping the last through the sides to give you a good shape at the back. And that's essentially, traditionally, the one thing that I do want to do is I'm just going to check this because I measured the other side. And I just want to see what kind of length we've got running here as well. 7. So, only a slight difference between the two. Quarter of a size in terms of the actual length between the left and the right. So nothing drastically dramatic there. Okay, so one of the things that, while you're just sitting down, Kirby, I just want to actually feel the base of your foot really, because I've got the foot impression from the shoes. I've got a basic drawing. I just want to feel underneath, just to see if there's any surprises, anything that I really need to know about. And usually here you'd begin to feel, perhaps some people have the metatarsals have actually dropped down through the flesh, so that you can actually begin to feel the bone sticking out at the base. You've got a slightly prominent ball joint just here, but it's not going to be anything that's really going to affect the shape of the last dramatically. So, or some people have very strong prominent cuneiform bones just here, which causes real physical discomfort when you've got a lace-up shoe and it starts catching on that bone. So really, it's just a question of, well, I'm just down here before I start putting any measurements on, just really looking at the foot, feeling the foot, and just feeling if there's anything that I really need to have any issue with. But the great news is you're in good shape at the moment. Maybe 20 years' time.
Yeah. And this is a point that is often quite painful for us.
Yes, I mean that's you've got a slightly prominent cuneiform just there. I mean it's a standard structure in a foot, so many people have that, and it's just something that this one on this side is not so prominent, but it's just something that we need to be aware of, especially when you're wearing a kind of an Oxford lace-up shoe like that, because obviously the closing system is catching right the way across there. So that's something that we just need to be aware of.
Yep.
Right, so the first measurement is, I'm always, as I was saying to you, I'm looking at relating the measurements down to the actual bone structure of your foot. So the first one is that I will need to come from across the large joint here, okay, and I'm going to come across between your little toe, the back of the toe, and the middle of the toe. So I'm really coming into this gap in between the two. And again, I'm just going to take a circumference measurement across there, 9.5. And again, these are the kind of measurements that in many ways most shoemakers will take. I'm going to take a diagonal measurement across the widest part of your foot here, from the bone there to the bone there, again tying it up into the way that I've actually drawn the plan of your foot. 10 and an 8. Just interestingly, does that feel too tight for you, Kirby? If I was to slacken off the tape measure to that, it's probably better, isn't it?
That's better, yeah.
That's better, yeah. Some people will take, I'm just going to put the tape round there. That's a behind the joint measurement. I'm going to remember on, sorry, I can't think, and 9.75. That's the measurement that really gives a bespoke shoe that feeling of when you actually put the shoe horn on and you think, my goodness, this is quite tight. I've really actually got to put, because obviously this measurement, the behind measurement here, running across here, is obviously a lot smaller. I mean, it's substantially half an inch smaller than the widest part of your foot. So to get a nice shape into your last, I want to actually cut this curvature and actually bring the last in here. So I'm going to give you that real kind of pull-on feel. So that's the measurement that gives me some idea about how that's the noise of a bespoke shoe coming in that measurement through there as well. With a lot of ready-to-wear shoes, when they make ready-to-wear lasts, they keep this measurement much fuller. So it makes it a lot easier to actually put the shoe on, and you don't get that same kind of pull. You don't actually get the overall woof of actually putting on a bespoke shoe. So I'm looking for the cuneiform bone now. So the tape measure is going to come up through the middle of the arch, over to the cuneiform, and it's a circumference measurement running round there. That, and I'm wary of the cuneiform, so I'm going to, as we discussed before, this is quite prominent on your foot. So I just need to make a note that one of the things that we need to do here, 10 and an 8, and we'll start looking for that bone. When we start carving the last, this is a point I'm going to be looking out for. As discussed earlier, so the next point I really want is, again, the structure of your foot. This point is where the top of the shoe is going to come to, where the laces is going to come to, so I'm interested in where the break is between the leg and the foot here. Again, up through the arch, over to where the break comes to. We get a nice old-fashioned imperial measurement, 10.5. And then the final measurement across the heel, from the heel up to the same area that we were looking at before, where that measurement came to. So we're going to come across there. $13.5. And most shoemakers, in any number of variations, will essentially do those principal measurements. That's the one. The only thing that we would really discuss, maybe do differently, is some people will measure with your weight standing up or your weight on the foot, so the actual foot begins to splay out. But as we actually look at your, when we actually start to make that last, what we'll do is we'll put some adjustments onto the measurements so that we'll make some accommodation for the movement of your foot, and we'll discuss that at a later date while we actually did that.
Brilliant.
Okay, so
Same thing for the
left.
left.
Same thing on the left. So I need to just mark the widest part of your foot there and there. Okay, if you pop your foot up there, you're sitting nice and comfortably. So again, thinking about the structure of your foot, feeling your foot, thinking about the bones inside your foot. So the first area that I'm looking at is straight across from the joint, the large joint here, to the dip between the fifth metatarsal here and the beginning of your pinky. So I'm looking at coming into this gap here with the tape measure. So just roll your foot back, Kirby. And then so it's going to come over there, over the large ball joint. And I'm just going to make it a little bit easy. So that's 9 3/16. Okay, again, thinking about the structure inside your foot, I'm looking for this bone here, prominent bone there, the fifth metatarsal bone, and your big toe joint. And again, tape measure underneath your foot, over the top. Nine, 7/8. Okay. Just a behind measurement. Some people don't take this measurement. I always like to have it. This is the one that just allows me to cut the last in behind your foot. 9 3/4, 4.
And at this point, these are just all standard measurements that you would use,
Yes.
you know, for any last.
Yes.
There's
these
nothing kind of particular about my foot that,
no.
you know, is sticking out or.
No, exactly. No, I mean you've got a very kind of, well, for want of a better word, normal-looking foot, really. So, yeah, which is a reason why you have kind of lovely-looking shoes made for you, because your foot shape really encourages nice shoes. And then the final measurement, 3/8. You see me glancing all the time at your other measurements because I'm just checking to make sure that they're all actually in relation. I can see that you've got very much a pair of feet apart from just this shape at the front here, which is slightly different. But I was just actually always checking back, looking at the measurements in relation to one another just to make sure that they're in line with each other.
And are you carving each last individually?
Yes, so each last will be carved completely individually. So yeah, they'll be different and the same. The great art is to actually make them look the same, even though the measurements and the feet are completely different. So, but with yours, they're going to be so subtly different that we don't really need to worry about it too much. But I just want to check that measurement, Kirby. Yeah, that's right. Can I just check that one? Okay. We're done.
What are you seeing there?
No, I just wanted to make sure that there's a difference between the width across here and the width across there. This one is wider. This foot is just wider in
So
this
half an
area
inch.
just here.
So
yeah, so I'm just checking out.
But
You
half
can
an
actually
inch is,
begin to...
you know,
yeah, so I was just
significant.
beginning to check out, just to make sure that these were correct.
Yeah,
Just wanted
absolutely.
to really make sure that we're in the right place there, because that was not...
Which could make sense because normally whenever I stand, I'm putting the weight on this foot.
Right.
So-
You usually find that if someone... Are you right-footed? If you were playing soccer, as you Americans
Absolutely.
say, would you be right-footed?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just want to really check this. That's the one thing that... I think that's It's certainly fuller than the other side. It's more 1/4 of an inch. I'm just going to take that down to 10 and 1/16. But there's a definite difference between the two. So that's the one thing that, as I was checking the measurements, I was actually looking back at the others, and just you can actually begin to see that now, that this foot is actually wider just through there than it is through there. And I just need to check. One of the things that I want to do is just have a look at this little piece of flesh on the outside here, just to see how much. One of the things you don't probably want to do, this is a part of the foot which you can afford as a LastMaker and a shoemaker. You can afford to move this. This is a very soft, fleshy part of the foot. So we're going to be tucking your last in just in that areas there. It's not going to have any impact on the way that the foot, the shoe is actually going to hold your foot, but it's going to make it nice and snug through there. So that's the last bit that I just wanted to check to see how much we could move that, and just have a bit of a feel around the back of the heel just to make sure that everything's okay.
Yeah, brilliant. So
Great.
then you'll take this, and
We're
I
done.
guess next we'll see you start to set up the last.
Yeah, we'll head downstairs into the workshop, and we'll start to sort of block out and get something organised.
Oh, that's exciting. I've never seen
Great.
the last be made, so
Great.
this is going to be a treat.
Super.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, great.